remember. As we start this last session for this evening, we want to look at four major tasks of grieving. There's no way, obviously, in just a few hours that we've been here to take you from A to Z. Just literally no way possible. But in order for us to sort of see what the other side, as one begins to get better in regard to their grief, and hopefully get beyond their grief, there are a few things that have to be done. One of them is they've got to learn to accept the reality of the loss. Dr. J. William Warden said this, that not only involves the emotional acceptance of the loss, but also the intellectual acceptance. Now, usually the intellect takes over, because we understand that something devastating has happened. And so our head knows something's changed. But the heart doesn't want to accept that. And so constantly there's the battle between the head and the heart. The first time I taught a class in 1992, in Evergreen, Alabama. The first 4 weeks I had dealt with the class from all the things I had learned. I'd gone to Montgomery, I'd gone to Mobile, I don't know if I came to Pensacola or not, but I had read books, and we started a support class there in the community, and I was just basically telling them the facts that I had learned. Without knowing it, well, and during that time frame, my mother-in-law was dealing with terminal illness. And we knew sometime that she was going to die. She died the end of the 4th week of my class. She died very suddenly. We took care of all the funeral arrangements in Northport and did the funeral and everything. And I came back and completed the last 4 weeks of that class. I told people the first 4 weeks I taught from the head, the last 4 weeks I taught from the heart. And so it takes time. I know we've said that over and again, but I hope you're getting that. It takes time to deal with both the intellectual as well as the emotional acceptance of a loss. It's very possible in dealing with a loss to deny the facts, to deny the meaning of the loss, and even to deny the irreversibility of the loss. Because you see, the loss means I'm going to have to change. The loss means I'm going to have to eventually adapt my life differently because of whatever loss it is that I'm dealing with. And that's why it takes so much time. And that's why the foggy brain comes on. And that's why the physical sensations come on. And that's why someone says a word and the emotions come on. And that's why even sometimes spiritually I wonder, where's somebody that cares about me? So we've got to remember that. We have to accept the reality of the loss. Secondly, we have to learn to experience the pain. Nobody likes pain. Ladies, you know that if you're having children, you know what that's all about. A man does not have the faintest idea what you've gone through to bring a child into the world. But in order to get better, you have to learn to experience pain. Several years ago, I had a knee replacement here, and then 7 months later on, I had one here. I told people the first time I was ignorant, the second time I was stupid. Because I knew what to expect the second time. And I still did it. If you have a knee replacement surgery, there's something called rehab. And if you don't take care of rehab, guess what? You're going to wish you had never had that surgery. Because it's going to hurt like whatever. You have to learn to experience the pain of loss. And again, we don't like pain. I understand that. But when you learn to experience the pain, then hopefully you come out better and you can move around and you don't have the issues that you had before surgery and before the loss of someone. 3, you have to learn to adjust to the environment in which that person, that thing, whatever it was that presented itself to be important, is no longer present. How long does that take? A long time. Oh, well, I know for a short time, because we typically have, after a few days, we have what we call the final service. But that's not the final service, is it, for all of us? It's just beginning then. And so, but you have to work your way through that. And that's why, and that's when we need friends and loved ones and people that care in the church and family members and others, counselors perhaps, or doctors or whoever, to help us to learn to deal with that. And then the 4th thing, we have to take some of the energy, some of the emotion that we've invested in that situation and go invest it somewhere else. Now, does that mean we're going to forget them? Absolutely not. We will remember them as long as we have a brain that works. But we're going to take that energy that we had for and with that individual, if we're dealing with the loss of an individual, and we're going to take it and do something cathartic and helpful in helping someone else. A lady was pulled over by a police officer one day, and because she was speeding, and as they were talking, of course, looked license, and the officer said, "Would you happen to be?" And he mentioned a name. And the lady said, "Yes, that was my father." Your dad was the chief of police when I was hired on. I learned everything about law enforcement from your dad. And he went on for 10 minutes talking about how important that man was to him personally. The lady said, "He could have given me a ticket for $10,000 and I would have just said thank you." He made my day. Because he reminded me of how important my dad was, not just to me, but how important he was to the community. And thus you take that energy, you take that the information, and because again, you're never going to forget them. But you want to do something to make them important, to make other people realize this is the way my dad lived. This is the way my mom lived. This is what was important to them. It's important to me now. And I'm living for them in the way I live my life. Likely, this church, just like we do at our congregation, have memorial funds to honor people in regard to maybe something here bought in the building or in some other kind of way. At our congregation in Huntsville, we started a token fund. Now, a token is a little gold coin that you have to use when you go to the hospital to get out of the parking deck. They charge you in our large city for the byline was, or the back line to that story was, there was a man, one of our church members, that had terminal illness, and he was in and out of the hospital over and over and over again. And it dawned on me one day, we'd given gift cards to food things and such things, but it dawned on me one day, every time this family is coming through here, they got to pay $2. And I just simply called the elders. I said, hey, can we go buy some tokens for them? Sure. Well, from that, we started a Mike Foster Token Fund. It has blessed about 1,000 people throughout the years of giving tokens to them to help them in a time of trauma and need at a hospital there in our community. His widow beams from ear to ear every time I talk about that and mention how important that is to our work at church. Look at some of the signs of moving to the future. And some of these are very common sense. Regrouping of the family. In other words, you realize bringing the family back together again means what? We may have to deal with pain. We may have to deal with misunderstandings. We may have to deal with people not being on the same page. That's okay. I'm willing to try that. You're not trying to overprotect the family. Ladies, that's exactly that's where you are. You're always trying to make everybody kind and loving and everybody feel accepted and everybody feel loved all at the same time. How you do it, I don't know. Men quit doing that a long time ago because we just don't have that ability like you do. But you bring them back in realizing, hey, this may not be the most pleasant time, but we're going to get through this and we're going to do the best we can because we're family and we belong together. You're able to begin to focus on others. You realize that in order to take what you've got and to receive what you've received, you go try to help somebody else. You can deal with your emotions without just being totally wiped out from day to day. Your interest in friends, old and new, becomes alive. And then, yes, you can laugh. And that's what I mean there. You can laugh, have a little fun without feeling guilty. 4 primary indicators. The physical sensations, those overpowering emotions that wear you out every day, they begin to subside. 2, the memories, they become sweeter. You can go days without having to 24/7 think about what that loss meant. And finally, you're able to take that ability and go do something else with someone else without feeling like that you've dishonored them. Obviously, we went over something that could take you months and months to deal with. But this is sort of your guide. This is sort of your precursor of what you want to do when you begin to start feeling better. Don? Thank you. Somewhere on a piece of paper, I want you to write down 2 words, and you can write them as big as you want to. But I just want you to write down 2 words. The first one is grief, and the second one is the word is. Grief is. If you were to fill in the blank of what grief is to you, what would it be? Perhaps maybe that's your homework as you take it home tonight or even after we leave tomorrow night. To think about what grief is to you, because we can talk about and tell you stories of other people, but you need to personalize it. You need to personalize it for your sake, for your family's sake, of what grief is to you. In the 10-week class that I do, that's what I often will ask them to do. Write down what grief is to you, or draw grief. That's an interesting concept. What does grief look like if you were to draw it? I want to read to you 2 ladies
from the many that have written what grief is to them. I want you to listen to these two statements, and I'll let you hear the first one, tell me what you think about it, and then the second one as well. And for those of you who are at home, and thank you for listening and watching, I hope that you'll choose to do that as well. Here's what one person said. To me, grief is like falling into a bottomless pit, continuously hitting the sides and being cut by the sharp rocks. There's no end to the fall, and the pain never ceases. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, no way out. It's probably like living for an eternity in hell would be like. Nothing will ever be the same, and so you wonder, why go on? What did you hear in the statement that she just wrote? Hopelessness. Giving up. Despair. Sadness. It was a lady, a mother-in-law, who was writing that concerning her son-in-law who chose to end his life. And those were her feelings. Now I want you to listen to this one. In the Webster's Dictionary, grief means a cause of such suffering, a mishap, a disaster. To grieve means sorrow. Since May 22nd, 1999 at 7:55 p.m., not only is suffering been a part of my daily life, but that day was the worst mishap and the greatest disaster of my entire life. Sorrow is something that awakens me in the morning, and it follows me everywhere all day, and it goes to bed with me at night. People say, stay busy. How much busier can one be than to take a college computer class, go to a grief support class, stay active in church, and help people less fortunate than I? I feel sad for what I have lost. I feel poor for the empty space. I cry for what I cannot have. I am restless for my life is not whole. However, you cannot abandon the ship simply because you cannot control the winds. I am not going to give up on God. I am going to thank Him for what I have left. What did you hear from her? Hope.
Resolute.
Faith, the resolution that things can be better in time. If she had hers pinpointed to the exact moment when it happened. And I really like the statement, you can't abandon the ship simply because you cannot control the winds. You were going to say.
The burden is still there.
The burden?
She's moving on.
The burden is still there, but she's moving on and she's dealing with it. Exactly right. What's interesting, this lady was such a help in our class. She would be the one that would try to build up everyone else in the midst of her own. And getting to talk to her, really sweet lady, I believe she was 65 at the time. This date that she gave in terms of the worst mishap in her life was the death of her second husband, not her first. Her first husband had died in a boating accident at the age of 25. Sudden, unanticipated loss. The one, 7:55, May 22nd, 1999, was the death of a husband after 10 years of cancer. That to her was the worst mishap of her life. And yet her point was, I'm not going to give up on God. And there's a statement over in Psalm 107, if you'll read verses 28 and 29, that suggests the hope that God gives us in the midst of the storms.
Then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble, and He brings them out of their distresses. He calms the storm so that its waves are still.
Isn't that interesting? God's either going to still the storm or He's going to calm His child. That's really important for us to keep in mind. And so when we think about how do we make it through the grief journey, and in no sense are we saying in 4 sessions we've gone through it all. We're just opening the door. Coming down, Ron and I spent some time working on Grief 2.0, which we hope will be the second time or the second whole system of classes that we didn't even do in times past. And we hope that folks will want us to come and do those sometime, completely different format and whatever. But here's 600 bereaved families that were asked the question, how do you make it in the grief journey? And here are the answers that you have before you. Number one, they find someone to share their grief with. They find someone to share their grief with. That may mean new friends or old, a new church. It may be even in time, if it was the death of a mate, a new mate. I heard about this lady in a nursing home who there was a new male resident that came to the nursing home. And on the first day that he was there, she walked up to him and said, "You look like my third husband." And he said, "Third husband, how many have you had?" She said, "2." There used to be that unwritten rule that you did not even begin to think about someone else at least a year after the loss of your loved ones. I don't know if that necessarily applies now or not. My father-in-law lost his wife to dementia after an 8.5-year battle with it. He told me, he said, "Don, I lost her a long time ago. I've been grieving for all this time and even before then." So within 3 months, he began to see another lady. And about 6 months after that time, he asked her to marry him. And I did their wedding. I think it was around Valentine's, about a year after the loss of his wife. He said, "Look, think about it. I'm 80 years old. How much longer do I have to live?" And then he said, and I'd never heard this before, but he said, "Me wanting to marry Barbara is a blessing because of how my first wife, Tommy was her name, made it so wonderful, so beautiful. And so it's blessing, it's honoring her because I want to do it again." And so they did have a wonderful life for 7.5 years after they got married. But anyway, they find someone to share their grief with. A church, new friends or old friends. They find someone to share their grief with. Secondly, they make a decision to move on. Making a decision to move on doesn't mean forgetting. You're not going to forget. You can't forget. You don't want to forget, and rightly so. But you choose to make a decision to move on. Grieving people want to know 2 things from everyone else. First of all, we truly don't understand how they feel. And secondly, we still care. They want to make sure that we don't forget the grief journey that they're in or their loved ones. And so they still make a decision to move on. Thirdly, they clean up relationships. After 9/11, sadly, a lot of families began to have weekly reunions, not waiting once every 1 year or 2 years, because that just showed us, COVID sadly has done that too, taking people that we thought would live on and whatever. So they clean up relationships. Folks who make it through grief, number 4, become forgivers. There's a biblical concept there. Ephesians 4:32. You be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. Why? Even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. There's that idea that we need to be able to extend grace and mercy to people as much as possible. Because there are a lot of people who are long on memory but short on forgiveness. COVID seemingly has done some of that. It's made people a little bit more caustic, a little less sympathetic. And, you've seen that. And we need to do the opposite. We need to, and that doesn't mean that we sell the truth. The Bible said, buy the truth and sell it not. We've got to stand for truth. but we also need to be able to try to forgive people as best we can. I was doing a workshop in Athens, Alabama at the West Hobbs congregation back in February. And right after I'd given this very lesson to those folks on that Saturday, about 70 people there, I believe it was, this lady walked up to me and she said, "My son had multiple sclerosis. And he was married, and after 12 years into his illness, his wife left him. She just couldn't bear to deal with the disease that had and was continuing and was going to get worse and afflicting his body and his life." And when he died, before he died, he had them go ahead and get the tombstone ready for himself. And he told his mother, on the tombstone, I want you to make sure that the verse, Ephesians 4, verse 32, is on there. Because I believe one day my wife will come back and visit my grave, and she will see that statement, and then at the end she will see the word forgiven. And I thought, wow, here's a man literally on his deathbed who is willing to extend forgiveness to the wife that left him. And he wanted her to know that when she comes back, he's forgiven her, that he'd already forgiven her. Ephesians 4, verse 32. Number 5, folks who make it through the grief journey becomes amends makers. We don't use that word amends much, but what does it suggest? When you hear somebody use the word making amends, what are we talking about? Making things right. Yeah. Trying to connect up, trying to come together. When we were at Freed Hardeman from 75 to 79, attending school, there was a wonderful professor by the name of Dowell Flatt. Brother Flatt taught Greek. He taught New Testament survey. He was about 5'6". He had a gold tooth. He had a doctorate from New Orleans Theological Seminary. Country fellow, lived out in West Tennessee, but a great, humble man of God. And I was taking a class, I believe they called it Paul's Epistles 2, because he was talking about a statement in Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, where it says, "Let your gentleness be known unto all men, the Lord is at hand." And he said, boys and girls, he said, that word gentleness literally means you be willing to meet them halfway. You go as far as you can with others. Don't sell out truth, but you be willing to try to join people together. Folks who have made it through grief have learned to extend that mercy and grace to others. Again, you can't sell the truth. You can't say, that's right when it's wrong. We can't do that. But he says, folks who make it through grief are willing to extend that mercy and try to meet people and try to work out the problems that are there. And then number 6 is so important. They learn that in giving, they receive. You see, first of all, what we've got to realize is that grief is a mirror. We looked at ourselves in the mirror today, tonight, whatever, before we came. And grief needs to be a mirror as long as it needs to be a mirror for you. No one but you knows what your loss or losses have done to you. Folks can talk about it, folks can sympathize, folks can cry with you, but you're the one that goes home with it. You're the one that deals with it on a regular basis. You need to let that grief stare you in the face, and you stare it in the face, and you work with it, and you accept it, and you try to deal with it and wear it as long as you need to. No time frame. Not 6 months, not 3 months, whatever the time, whatever it is, you let it be yours. What you want to do ultimately is for that glass to turn outward and become a window, where you see not only your loss, but the losses of others. And by seeing the loss of others, you're willing to and able to help them, while at the same time seeing your own reflection in that glass. Does that make sense? You take care of yours as long as you need to. Imagine somebody in just a moment runs in here, and one of you has a bad leg, and you have a cane, or perhaps you're on crutches because of something that happened, and someone calls out, "Hey, there's a fire! Get out of here!" And everybody jumps up. And we're hopeful we're going to be mindful of every one of us. But what if I were to say, "You don't need that cane," and I pull it? No, that'd be ugly of me. Why would I even act that way? No one needs to take your grief away from you. Doug Manning wrote a book about that. Don't take my grief away from me. And no one needs to do that. And it needs to be a mirror as long as it needs to be a mirror. But the hope is that it begins to turn outward and you begin to see the hurts of others. Helen Keller lived in Tuscumbia, Alabama. That's about 18 miles from where I live, out in the edge of Florence. Any of you been to her outdoor play? Okay. I'm inviting you to come to Florence, Alabama, to go to the music place where Elvis recorded his music. Music Hall of Fame. Go to the Music Hall of Fame, Alabama Music Hall of Fame. Spend some money for our state. And then go to the outdoor play, which is literally in the backyard of the house that she lived in when, you remember, she spelled out the word water on the place, which that's there literally. That's where it is. But she made the statement, as long as you sweeten someone else's pain, life is not in vain. She knew something about that. Think about all the things that she went through, the years that she lived. They didn't have all the services that we now have for people who can't speak and whatever. And yet she was able to talk about that. And that's so very important, to be able to out of the midst of her own sorrows, to be able to help others. And in the grief journey, we get to the point, hopefully, where we see not only our pain, but also the pains of others. Bill McDonald, who helped start us in this work years ago, he's a funeral home director in Centerville, Tennessee, owns several funeral homes, elder of the church, grief counselor. Tells a story about this young lady who had lost her husband very suddenly in a car accident. He did the funeral, and he spent time with her for weeks and for some months trying to help her and counsel her. And he said she was months removed from the death, and yet she wasn't willing to move on. All she was thinking about was the tragedy and not willing to deal with, what do I do now? And so he did something somewhat bold as a counselor. He said, don't come back to me until you're ready to talk about not how he died, but how he lived and how you're going to live with this tragedy. He said several months passed. Finally, he said, one day I heard her before I saw her. She was in the outer office. She was laughing it up with the girls out there. She had a big smile on her face. I came in from my outside office, the inner office, I should say. And he said, she had this big grin on her face. And he said, what have you done? You done something in your hair? No. You got a new dress on? No. Come on in and tell me about it. So they went in. And she said, Bill, last night I made 12 dozen chocolate chip cookies. Oh, you're on a sugar high. She said, no, just listen to me. She said, I got 12 of those silver pans out. I put a dozen here, dozen here, all the way down, wrapped them all up. and then took them to 12 families here in Centerville, Tennessee that needed them. And what was her point? The glass had turned outward. Her pain was still there, but she was now able to work with it, process it, and help herself while she was helping others. There are people, no doubt, right here where we're sitting today that will be able to do things in the lives of others that you as a minister won't be able to do because of the experiences that you have. Ron and I have lost parents. We haven't lost a child. We haven't lost a wife. There's some things that I can talk about and I can express my love and care and concern, but I don't have those feelings because I haven't had those losses. But some of you, out of your own situations, will be able to help. And folks who make it through grief learn that in giving, they receive. This little boy was walking down a country road one day and he saw a big sign there at the edge of the lane. Puppies for sale. So he walked up the road and there was a man standing there. He said, "Sir," he said, "do you have some puppies?" He said, "I do." He said, "Well, what kind of puppies are they?" He said, "Well, son, they're registered puppies." He said, "They're somewhat expensive." He said, "Well, I've got 39 cents in my pocket. Can I see one of them?" He said, "Sure, you can see them." So the man, "Come on, Dolly." Mother dog came out of the kennel, and here came all these big, fat, furry puppies running behind the mama dog up to where the boy and the man was. He looked back and he saw one dog was real slow in coming up, that he was a lot slower than the other ones. And so as they all got up there, and he said, "Well, you got some mighty good puppies here." He said, "Yes, I do." He said, "I want to buy that one, that last one there." He said, "Son, you don't want that one." He said, "Why?" He said, "He's got a bad leg. He was born with a bad leg. He's not going to be able to run and play like all the other puppies." He says, "You don't want that one." Little boy reached down on his pants leg and pulled it up. And from the bottom of his foot all the way up, you could see an iron rod that was attached to his foot. He said, "That puppy's going to need someone like me because I can't run and play either. And he's going to need somebody like me to be able to help him. How much is that puppy?" And the man said, "Son, there's no price for love. The puppy's yours." Out of his own sadness, he was able to help people. And folks who make it through grief learn that in helping others, they also help themselves. Number 7, they learn to live in the present moment. The Apostle Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, had a very sad beginning in the sense of Christianity. He thought that it was something to be fought against. He held the clothes of men as they stoned Stephen because he thought what Stephen had to say was blasphemous. He would go with letters of authority into homes and pull out Christian moms and Christian dads and haul them off to prison or perhaps even death, thinking he was doing the right thing. But in Philippians 3 verses 13 and 14, he said, "Forgetting those things which are behind." Think about those things, those stories that we just talked about. "And pressing on to those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus." Sometimes in grief, we have to live to learn in the present moment. Maybe things didn't go like they needed to. Maybe things weren't said that needed to be said. Maybe things didn't happen in the past that were not the best things. But folks who make it through grief learn to live with what is, not what was. And that's so, so very important. Next, they share their new feeling of life. Henry Nouwen came up with a concept years ago that folks who are in grief are called wounded healers. I like that concept. Healing, hopefully in the process, the wounds are still there. Wounded healers. More recently, people have come with the concept of creative survivors. I like that one as well. You're in the process of surviving, and you're being creative about it. You're trying to do what you can to make it better. But they share their new feeling of life. Hopefully they see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully they see that there is, even in the midst of their sadness, the wonderful, glorious memories that will always be there as long as they have life in memory. William Faulkner made the statement in Wild Palms, a book that he wrote, "Between grief and nothing, I will take grief." Think about that. Between grief and nothing. One of the things that sometimes I'll ask my class is, and later on I found out that Alfred Lord Tennyson made this statement, "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved before." And I'll ask them that question. What about you? You feel the pain, but look at the love that you receive from that person. C.S. Lewis, grief is the price you pay for love. Is it better to have loved and lost? You feel the loss than never to have loved at all. People have to answer that question themselves. The folks who make it through grief begin to share that new feeling of life. You know, you go to a cemetery, I'm sure there's one nearby, and you'll see the dates on those tombstones. You'll see the name of the person. Typically, if a person has died, what two dates are you going to see under their name? Birth and death. And in between that is the dash, right? And then if a person has not yet died, like a mate, you're going to see their name and their birth and then the dash. Right now, we're all living our dash, aren't we? We don't know when our end will be unless Christ comes again. We don't know when that time is. I guess God knows if He wants to know, and I trust that He does. And He's infinite. But we don't know. But we're living our dash. So it's up to us to do what we can with what is left of our life and to live that dash, not only to honor God, but also to honor our loved ones who've passed on. Earl Groman, a Jewish rabbi, said, "The greatest monument you will ever erect is to live a life of meaning and purpose in honor of those who gave you life." And it's so important for us to do that. My hope is that in these 4 sessions that we've given you some information that you can build off of, that you can gain perspective from. We'll be more than glad after we finish here to stay around as long as you'd like to, because we'd love to hear your stories and whatever. Tomorrow, as Ron says in here, we'll be talking about how to help people who have loved ones or going through terrible situations. How do we help those who are sick, but also help the caregivers? We tend to forget the caregivers. How can we do that? That's what this class is about. And then tomorrow night, some very, very practical things, 10 practical things that this congregation can do. Bring something to write with, if you will, because I'm going to give you a list of, I believe, 24, 25 things that folks said, here were the things in those first few days, first few weeks that really helped me in my grief struggles. And so we'll try to talk about that. Any questions or any comments before I turn it back over to Mr. Troy? Again, we're grateful. There's a lot of places you could have been tonight, but you chose to be here. For those who are watching, thank you so very, very much. We'll turn it over to you, sir.
Once again, outstanding work, gentlemen. We really appreciate it, and heard nothing but positive comments from everyone that has talked to me aside from this, and so very thankful to have you with us. Look forward to tomorrow. Before we leave, just got a text from Lori Taylor, and said that Joe is having some nausea and is not wanting to eat. He did walk down the hallway today, but they're a little bit concerned about him, so they're giving him some more medicine. The doctors are attending to him, so she's just asking for more prayer. So I'd like to, if we could, close out tonight and have our shepherd, Brother Rick, if you wouldn't mind leading us in prayer, and we'll stand dismissed.